So,
okay, should I just crack on?
Yeah, I should have recorded my intro. That
hello,
would have been...
everybody.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
You can do it again better with more special effects later on if you like. Well, it was a great honour to be asked to be in City and to have my work featured, and especially given my playing kind of there with the deadlines on that, as Andrea will remember, because it was quite a busy period for me. But I was really glad to be in the journal and to be able to talk about what I do. And I think this gathering today is, I wouldn't say that's my ideal audience. I have lots of audiences, I suppose, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I sometimes talk about in relation to my work which makes people zone out a wee bit or look a bit confused or angry. But this group should get it, hopefully. I'm hoping you will get what I'm talking about today. You all seem to have frozen. Have you all frozen? Oh dear. Am I coming through okay?
No, still here.
Yeah, you're coming through okay. I was
Okay.
just going to say, if actually people could turn off your,
Right.
if people could turn off cameras and stuff, that'd be great now that we're starting. Thanks.
Okay. My computer and I are having a wee bit of a issue today, so I'm hoping it stays with me and doesn't get in the way of the talk. So when we talked, Andrea and Debbie and myself, about what we could do, the idea was I would maybe talk briefly about the overview of my work and then show you in depth how some of the drawings and artworks developed and why effectively they did that way. And what I kind of want to cover today is not just the dialectogram idea and the stories of place that allows us to look at, but also kind of the change in methodology, because a dialectogram, right, and I know some are probably concerned about this word and wondering if they missed a memo or something as to what this means. Don't worry, you didn't. I made the word up, just to be clear. But a dialectogram, if it means anything, is not just a process, but a process I have cobbled together over, as Andrea says, 10 plus years of making them. So I thought to start with, though, I'll just give you a very, very brief, like no more than 5 minutes, plotted history of dialectograms and what they are, just by showing you some of the ones that I've done over the last few years. So I'm going to try and share screen, PowerPoints. Okay, hopefully, is everyone seeing a PowerPoint? Can someone just confirm that for me, please?
Yes,
Yep.
I can see it.
Good, excellent, smashing. Right, so I'm just going to show you basically all of the major dialectograms I've made over the past 10 years or so, very, very quickly, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about in that sense. So this one here you're seeing just now, hopefully, as the slideshow starts, is Travelology. It's not the first dialectogram per se, but I call it Dialectogram Zero, as in it was the first drawing that I did of this type, and it was from this rough idea that I developed all the stuff that came after. So Travelology from about 2008-9 shows one of many travellers' yards or showman's yards, in this case in terms of that community, that are found in the East End of Glasgow. There's about 50 of them, ranging in size from very small to really huge places, usually in gap sites, of which we have a lot of in Glasgow. And by the way, I will be talking about Glasgow a lot in this presentation. It's where I live and work, and for someone like me, I suppose it is a never-ending source of interest as a city for good and ill. So that was the kind of the first stab at this, and it was really very accidental. While I will talk a wee bit about some theory today, I'm not going to pretend that this was some disciplined, ordered process of developing the idea. Dialectograms are artworks. I am an artist, I'm a cartoonist, that's primarily what I do. Although I've been fortunate enough to be able to talk to lots of different disciplines within academia and elsewhere as I go along. Because as you can see, even hopefully from this first one, they are a mashup. They're a mashup of architectural plans, cartography, as you'll see, lots of cartooning in them as well, and comics, and other kind of diagrammatic aspects here. And here I'm showing the Travellers' Yard in the East End, as much as possible from the perspective of the people involved. And I'll come back to this first one when I get into kind of more depth a little later. And then, on the strength of that drawing, having had it exhibited, I was asked to go to the Red Road Flats in Glasgow and did a series of 5 drawings over about 5 years, actually as a resident artist at the housing scheme, which was at that point being decommissioned and decanted. So they were preparing it for demolition and moving everybody out. So I worked there for quite some time. I did a drawing called the Concierge Station first off in 2009-10. I then did one called the Nivens from Seven, which looked at a family that lived in the flats over 40 years in the same apartment, and sort of explored that history. My third one was the Mecca Bingo and Social Club. Red Road was a place of extremes. Everyone lived in the sky, but all the leisure facilities were buried underground just because, no, I don't really know why, but that's what they did. And so there was this massive underground bingo hall, which I gained access to, and it was derelict at the time. So it was an exercise in reconstruction as much as anything else of that space. Next, it was a bar called The Brig, an underground bar built in the shape of a ship. I kid you not. And I also was a reconstructive process there across those 2 dialectograms. And then I brought it all together in a kind of final drawing at Red Road, which was an overview of the whole place and kind of incorporated elements from all the different drawings and bits of research that I did. So this series of 5 is where I really developed the idea fully and worked out a working process that allowed me to produce these really large, intricate drawings. I mean, you probably can't see because of the speaker view here, but I've got one behind me there, and they're about the size of a small dining table, generally. And now, yes, I am compensating for something clearly, but the size of that and the scope of them, the scale allows me to look in real detail at a place in all sorts of ways and create objects as well that I think demand to be looked at to some extent, or at least grab attention in various different ways. After Red Road, or just the last years of that, I redrew the first ever, the Dialectogram Zero, as it were, this year, the Showman's Yard. There were various reasons for that, some of them ethical for doing that. So I revisited that first one and did a new version there. I was then, well, several things happened. I then did a residency when I tried to draw an entire street. I grew my beard very long and went a bit crazy. And as a result, there is no finished dialectogram of that process. But from that process and other questions I was starting to ask about my work, several things happened. I went to do a PhD at the Glasgow School of Art based on my practice. So I invented a word called dialectogram, and then I had the cheek to go and do a PhD on this word that I had invented. How I got away with that, I don't know, and I'm sure at some point someone will pull me up for it. But having done that and starting to look at seriously what I was doing and the kind of concerns that the work was raising at times, I started to work in a new way. So through another residency that I did with an organisation called Collective Gallery, based in Edinburgh, I did a series of drawings based on the Commonwealth Games, which for those of you outside of the UK is like a sort of second-rate Olympics, which is held amongst the old British colonies effectively, and is like the Olympics on a 4-year cycle. Glasgow hosted them in 2014, which, as with all of these major events, creates all sorts of issues and interesting and sometimes horrible outcomes from that in terms of regeneration, disruption, and what have you. But my job was to look at the spaces around Commonwealth Games sites. So that began with Edinburgh. So a bit of foreign travel, went down the N8 from Glasgow, and I looked at a community space near the old site of the last Commonwealth Games to be held in Scotland, which was a place called Pearse Hill, a working class community in Edinburgh. And I'll talk about this drawing a bit later. There's also the sports stadium itself, where the first Commonwealth Games in Scotland were held, so I drew that. That's a double-sized one as well, so that was quite quite a lot of fun to do. I then looked at some of the sites that were being developed in Glasgow and, you know, changed in Glasgow, and one of these was a children's adventure playground, which was built on the site of an old steel foundry. And this was a very kind of radical idea of adventure playgrounds. It was based on child democracy and, you know, cooperative working and so forth. So it was a very interesting thing to be involved in, and I spent quite a lot of time there helping out at the playground, but also trying to draw it and take the children's ideas and turn it into a representation of their place, as it were. And this was also turned into a sign, which kind of still stands there today, I believe. So there was these projects here, and this is where my kind of methodology was changing quite a bit. I then went from a children's playground to a library in Clydebank, just outside of Glasgow, where again, another double-sized dialectogram, I drew the library space over its 100 years of existence, but also in these last few years where it's been struggling in a way to deal with the 21st century and the new demands being put on it. I then did a couple of historical dialectograms, you could say, or semi-historical. This one here reconstructs a miner's row in North Glasgow. So North Glasgow was where ironstone and steel, you know, the ingredients for steel for the shipbuilding were mined, and so there were several lost mining villages basically, which have disappeared. But through this project, we tried to recreate. I also did some work in Govan with the African Arts Centre. I couldn't find that drawing to put in the presentation today, but I did do that too, looking at the African community in Govan in the south of Glasgow, much of which is quite new and quite recent in terms of immigrant communities, and work with them. I then went to Falkirk, so a bit more travel outside of Glasgow, and looked at their steeple and their town centre, both today and historically. So it was a blend of sort of social commentary almost and historical sort of retrospective that I did through this. And that's the nice thing about illustrating space. Time is less of an issue. You can play with time in all sorts of ways. So I drew a steeple, which was a bit weird to draw. I then also worked with the people at Kirkintilloch, just north of Glasgow, foundry town, where their old town hall, a kind of product of trade union philanthropy and all of these things that built these town halls in these small towns across the UK, was being refurbished and brought back into life, as a new sort of facility. So we worked with the people there developing a new facility for the community to represent their town hall, to capture some of its history, but also some of its current issues and also the period of its dilapidation. I also worked with the Civic Trust in Scotland for this dialectogram, which looks at tenements in Scotland. Scotland quite famous for its tenements, its stone-built apartment blocks, as it were, usually a very fine kind of character and quality. A lot of issues with tenements, though, in terms of upkeep and landlordism and all sorts of social issues that make tenements quite a difficult aspect of our housing at the moment. So working with the Civic Trust, we kind of gathered testimony from tenants and people living, and owners as well, people living in tenements just now, and just talking about most of the problems. I would have liked to have looked at other things as well in this project, but it was a very specific project looking at issues of landlordism and absenteeism and how that impacts the tenement experience. And then lastly, the last one that I've finished just last year, another doubler of the Barrowland Ballroom, a music venue in Glasgow, which if you like music and you're ever in Glasgow, I order you to go to at least once. It's an amazing sort of place for music, but also a very important touch point in the social history of the East End of Glasgow in particular, and the Calton area where it's based. It's a very strange venue. It's still run by the same family. It's still partly a market. It was a ballroom. It has all of this sort of hybrid chimeric quality to it, which I love. I've always loved since I was a teenager, getting thrown out there, being underage at gigs back in the day to now. So this was a bit of a dream project, which I was able to do in terms of depicting the Barras, the Barrowlands as it's known. Okay, so I'm going to just stop the share there and come out of that. And so that is what a dialectogram basically is. In almost all cases, the end result of a dialectogram is a large, intricate drawing of space, of place, like this here. And several things happen with that. So there's lots of field work for a start, where I'm on site, working with tenants, workers, occupants of some kind, the people who use the place and know it best, I suppose you could say. And I work with them quite intensively over many months. And the one thing I always say to anyone commissioning me is I'm not quick, right? It's not a quick process. This takes a wee bit of time. And I spend quite a lot of time building relationships and then using that to create some kind of representation of their place as much as possible with them. Once a dialectogram is completed, they're also as much as possible cited within the community, whether that's in a kind of weatherproof sign, as has been the case with quite a few of them, or within a local library or a local public space, or in a nearby museum. You know, it'll depend on the situation, but I always make sure to cite it and find a way of it staying there as well after I've gone on to the next project, so that the dialectogram, as much as possible, you know, is something they can use. And every dialectogram, as you've seen, is scanned, and we can turn that into publications, posters. No one's done a tablecloth yet, but I am waiting for that day with great impatience, because it's crying out for a tablecloth, definitely. But you know, they can use also the prints of that in various ways. Some have used it educationally or as aspects of their heritage, you know, kind of motion or whatever that community is doing. And from the start, I'm always going into a community and working closely with them. And the first question I usually ask is, what do you need? What are you looking for? What do you get out of this? I get to draw a big map, style things. That's what I get. But I'm also interested in what they're getting and what's coming out of that. So to sort of explain that a bit, I don't know if anyone's got any questions at this point or anything they want to put through the chat. I'm happy to answer questions as we go, by the way. But if you like, we can then now start looking at a dialectogram in more detail, and I can show you sort of how it has come about and how it kind of is constructed. So what I thought I would do is show you an early one called the Concierge Station. So this is one of the Red Road dialectograms, and I'll just go to full screen if I can here, so you can see it properly. I hope you're all seeing this. Someone wants to say yes or no?
Yes, I'm totally seeing it.
Excellent. Thank you. So, yeah, I thought if I'm going to sort of explain what I do, really the best thing is to look at it and to look at a few of them. And usually what I do in a live talk back in those days when they happened was I would fold out reprints of the dialectograms and fold them out and let people have a look and talk about it there. So this is the next best thing, which is looking at PDF. So this was one of the very first I ever did, and I still think it's one of the ones I like the best, and I think it's partly kind of nostalgia maybe, but it was also when I really worked out what was going on. So I was asked into the Red Road Flats by the cultural project there that was working very hard to firstly provide facilities for a lot of the existing tenants, and up to the very end, Red Road had mostly asylum seeker, homeless tenants, and the remainder of what was called the old tenants, the sort of working class Glaswegians who had moved in the 60s and 70s and were long-term tenants there. So the cultural project partly offered facilities to most of the children and you know, women's groups and things like that, but it also was trying to preserve the legacy of the scheme. So Red Road, feel free to Google it. You know, it's one of the more famous housing developments in Glasgow. So Glasgow has this interesting connection and relationship with high-rise living. Outside of the Soviet bloc, I think it was the most intensive process of high-rise development anywhere outside the Soviet bloc was within the greater Glasgow area during the 60s and 70s, partly to prevent the depopulation of the city, which was a government policy. And a researcher called Chip Collins, actually, of Strathclyde Uni, has shown quite conclusively how the British government really wanted Glasgow to die in the post-war era because, well, partly because it was full of trade unionists and troublemakers, and they just didn't like this big urban conurbation and the power base that it had through that. So there was this push-me-pull-you of Glasgow with population and trying to retain the population by the council and trying to depopulate it and move and break up communities from kind of the central government, really, through this period. And part of the solution to that was building high-rise blocks. Now, most of these were built in package deals, as in the builder would have pre-bought plans and you just say, do you want that? Yeah, we'll build that, put it up, which caused lots of problems in a lot of cases because some of these were being bought from Algeria or the south of France. And if there's one thing Scotland can say about itself, it does not have the climate of either of those places. So there were issues with that. But Red Road was interesting because it was both typical and not typical. It was typical in being high-rise, but atypical in that it was a Manhattan-style high-rise development. It was steel-framed and steel-faced, like a Manhattan tower block, but in a place that was as far from Manhattan as you could imagine, with very few facilities and very little of the things that make Manhattan work as a place, you could say. So I'm going to see if I can zoom in here. It's not that we zoom in, that's really annoying. Okay, let's just carry on. So this is the Concierge Station. The Concierge Station was a drawing that came about really from the dilemma that was put onto me when I started doing this work in Red Road, which was come to Red Road, we want you to work with the tenants and we want you to look at the interior of the buildings. There were a lot of artists at Red Road in its final days because of its iconic status within Glasgow kind of urbanism. A lot of people doing films and a lot of people photographing these massive tower blocks and kind of lots of sweeping 3D panoramas and so forth. What they didn't have was visuals of the insides and visuals of the interior life. So I'd done my first attempt at a dialectogram already, and I was asked, could I come and do that at Red Road? And to be honest, I had no idea if I could, but because I was a starving artist, I said yes, because that's always what you say when people ask in this game. So I went up there and I really just constructed a methodology as I went along. So one thing that I'd taken from my first experiments was the power of the bird's eye view, right? Bird's eye view gets a bad rap in some of literature. De Certeau famously, Michel de Certeau, the French Marxist Jesuit theorist, is dead against it because it erases what happens at ground level potentially. And people like Tim Ingold and so forth from anthropology quite recently also, have a go at the bird's eye view. And it is a view of power. It is a view from the powerful. You're above. If you're that far above something, you've done something to do that. I suppose you've enacted certain powers and privileges to take that lofty view, if you like. But I always thought with the bird's eye view, it depended what kind of bird you're talking about, because swallows and migratory birds are not that interested in the ground level, but pigeons, for example, and the rats of the city, as it were, the rats of the sky, are. Pigeons know what's happening on the street. They will know where the kebabs and the chips are left after a Friday night. They need to know. They need to use their bird's eye view to actually understand the streets rather than forget they're there, if you know what I mean. And I don't know if I'm making sense, but just now, but hopefully it will as we go along. So for me, the bird's eye view was more interesting than that, and offered more than maybe some of the writing on it always suggested, or some of our assumptions about it always suggested. And I was very influenced by the work of Judith Okely, who to my mind is one of the best researchers on gypsy and traveller life there has ever been. And I remember reading her description of a gypsy camp many years before this I'd ever done this. And the description is just one paragraph. It's very simple, but it suspends the bird's eye view and the ground level view together in tension with each other really nicely. And it manages somehow to capture a bit of both and use the bird's eye view to understand the ground and vice versa in a nice way. And that, I think, if there's any theoretical debt that I really owe to anything, it is that basic idea of keeping these things in tension and seeing what we can do through that. So with the concierges, who are the janitors, the caretakers of the flats, or where I found a group of people who were ideal for my first encounter there. Who's going to know this place better than the guys who repair it, who deal with tenants every day, who pick up the knives and the needles, which unfortunately were commonplace on stairways, who, you know, just have to make this place run. And fortunately, they were kind of bored at this stage. The decant of the flats had begun in earnest, and tenants were moving out, you know, in quite large numbers at this point. So they had very little to do comparatively to their normal routine. So some guy coming in asking stupid questions wasn't actually unwelcome. It gave them something to do and a bit of a break from their usual routine. So I became, you know, kind of friendly with them. I went in the rounds with them a lot. I picked up a needle, which I don't think they should have let me do, but I wanted to, but I don't think that would be allowed now ethically in any stretch. But yeah, I didn't mention that to their bosses. And yeah, in deciding what to draw first, I thought, well, their station, the place where they work from, is the place to go, because it is really the hub of any given block of flats. And there were 8 blocks of flats in Red Road. So this is 10 Red Road Court, and what you can see here is from above, I treated their concierge station as a map, really, and, you know, with its geographical features, whether that's the lockers here, which are kind of like a sort of aluminium Stonehenge, which you find in one of the rooms, or, you know, the main sort of base station here where the CCTV was, and all the different items that kind of mattered. And several things that I kind of just developed through this exercise, really. One was, well, the great thing about drawing in the graphic form, if you like, is you can move from various different types of space really easily. So from the bird's eye view, you can go into elevation here. And basically I treated, you know, these lockers in this kind of top right corner as a geographical feature, and just described everything that's on them. But you can also go into things like comic strips. You'll see here in the bottom left 2 comic strips, and one up here as well, where I'm, you know, telling it more in a more kind of straightforward narrative form. And then also diagrams. So I've done all sorts of strange diagrams as well. This one here is based on an incident book, which was an actual thing that you know, the concierges kept underneath the counter, and they let me have a look at theirs very kindly. And because it didn't matter anymore, it wasn't, you know, an issue. And over like the course of 20 years almost, there was all of these incidents that I could then turn into, you know, episodes for the drawing. But the main aspect of it all, the main underpinning aspect, and the reason they're called dialectograms, is the use of language as well, and the importance of language in this. So what I'm doing to gather the information for this is I'm sketching a lot on site as much as possible. I'm taking photographs, terrible photographs, awful photographs, really boring light switches and cupboards and corners, you know, things that help me piece it back together after the fact. And then a lot of interviewing. My basic technique from the start has been to get to know people first, and then when they're ready, bring out the recorders and start to record sessions with them. Some of those I did on the hoof, like walking with them on the rounds, and some we did just having a cup of tea there. And what this did was I was able to then layer verbatim the testimony, if you like, that they shared with me into the map itself. So all of the labeling, I suppose you could say, comes from the people there. There's very little labeling that is, for example, my terminology. I always went with what they called something. And yeah, I tried to use as much as possible to kind of spatialize the conversations we had and place the text from that either where it had happened or where it was referring to in some way. But I was trying to always let the participant, if you like, lead that process of description and naming, if you like. And that really was sort of one of the core things that has carried through to every single drawing I've done since then. And the final thing that came out of this was the importance of objects and the kind of archaeological element of what I do or what I was doing, which was, you know, what stories can they tell? What stories can the objects tell? So the lockers tell a lot about the camaraderie and the relationships between the concierges, because there was a culture of leaving stuff in the lockers, you know, stuff that smelled bad, or, you know, rude messages or whatever, on everyone's lockers. There was Celtic and Rangers fans in there, for example, so you can imagine the fun stuff that was left in either case there. But also things like keys, and I took great care in describing where all the keys were kept within the concierge station, because concierges don't just give out keys a lot, as you can imagine, but they actually they relate to the place through keys. So a room is that key number, or a family is that key number. I remember introducing a family to one of the concierges who hadn't lived there for a while, and he couldn't remember the name at all, but as soon as they told him the key number, he remembered exactly who they were. So it was quite interesting as well, how objects unlocked narrative and ways of thinking about the place as well. And that was really what I was trying to do throughout the Red Road. Understand the place through anything I could grab or pinch or, you know, recreate, whether that was an oral testimony or a thing, as it were. You know, either would do, and I would just grab those and make use of them. And through those 5 dialectograms, I suppose I developed a sort of documentary style initially, and it was very much like a documentary approach. You go there, you talk to lots of people, you say thank you very much at the end, you get their permission to use the material, then off you pop to your studio, like this one here, or wherever you're working, and then you make something, and then when it's all finished, you take it back and you see what they think of it, basically. And that actually was unsatisfactory for me, and I think for some of the participants as well, in that we'd had a very deep relationship in the fieldwork, and then suddenly I was taking things away and not talking to them anymore. And I'll get back to how I tried to deal with that in just a wee minute. So I'm going to stop the share just for a minute there and show you another one now. The one that came before that, which is the back causeway or travelology drawing. So I'm just going to share screen again, if I can. If I can find it. Is everyone still with me, by the way? No one's lost the will to live?
Oh, yeah.
No, this is awesome.
I'll take that as a yes. Okay. Right, I'm pushing on, right. So this is travelology, which is the very, as I say, Dialectogram Zero, the first one that I made. And I wanted to, before I moved on to what happened after Red Road, I wanted to just talk about the very deep origins of this and why I was doing it this way at all. And the answer is really this drawing. Okay, so this drawing here is one that doesn't get shown very much, actually, for a lot of reasons. A lot of the agreements and ethical arrangements changed after the fact, after this drawing was made, which meant that I not only redrew it, but took this one out of commission. So you about these kind of talks, unfortunately. So travelology from 2008 was inspired actually by the announcement that Glasgow would be the host of the 2014 Commonwealth Games, because as part of that package and part of that bid, they had vowed to regenerate the East End of Glasgow, something that people, myself included, could not really argue with, because the East End of Glasgow is, you know, still shockingly poor and poverty-stricken and in real need of development, and had been neglected for many years. However, as part of that, what was you know, a feature of the East End of Glasgow that was quite interesting was the prevalence of traveller communities within Glasgow, within that area. In particular, showground or fairground travellers, or showmen, as we know traditionally. And these are the people who run fairs and circuses, typically travelling out for weeks and months during the spring and summer and early autumn, and then coming back in the winter. And they would winter in Scotland, at least within Glasgow, which had the highest concentration of travelling show people in Europe, in terms of, you know, pound for pound. There was a lot of them there. And it's also a community I come from. So I was born and raised in this community as well, I should say. So this, from the outset, was an insider's view and also something quite personal as well to me. I grew up, and I still live on wheels, grew up on wheels. You know, this kind of life, which I was describing within this drawing and the other, is the life that I've known best, basically. And what was happening was there was about 20 to 30 grounds, as we call them, or yards, which were at threat from the new development. Because, as I say, the idea was to sweep away large swathes of the city and rebuild there. And what tends to happen with travellers in general, and this goes for Romani and Gypsy travellers and Irish travellers as well, is we tend to slot ourselves into the brown belt and to the gap sites and the places no one wants to go. A lot of the time, you go into any city, if there's a sewage works, you'll find a traveller site somewhere because no one really wants to live there, but we can, and we can be, unmolested there to some extent. So this is a drawing of where I live now, and I live in the top left here, actually, to this day, is Back Causeway, which is the site of an old foundry, Park and Patterson. So it used to be a steel foundry during the days of Glasgow's industrial era, of great industrial, kind of powerhouse era, and then became brown belt, and then we came along mid-90s in our case to basically turn it into a living space. And these were the kind of spaces that were to be wiped away and erased. Not ours actually, but a lot of other grounds that I had been there a lot longer actually, and I knew really well, and I knew everyone on basically. So what was missing from this redevelopment, of course, was any alternative being given to these communities, or rather the alternatives were often bound up in quite sinister corporate arrangements and quite costly to the families as well. The cost was being borne by the families, not by the developers and large companies wanting to profit off of the games. And there was this sense of erasure of, you looked at the architectural drawings, the concept maps, the plans, as it were. We weren't there. We were not anywhere in those plans. We were, it was that trick that architects do, but they pretend there's something called space, right? And I think, personally, my view on space is it doesn't really exist. It's a fiction that we create so we can do something in an area, in a territory, right? So we pretend it's vacant, we pretend it's open so we can do something to it. And that was what was happening in the East End. Basically, this idea of, there's this space we can build on. Well, fine, but there was no sense of what was happening to the communities already there and where they went and what they did. So this was not a protest per se, but it certainly elements of satire. Because what I was doing at this stage was I was thinking very much about what was happening to us. I think I just reread Okely, who I mentioned before, who of course had written about places much like mine, much like the place I grew up in. And in that way, which I think is always good in any bit of theory or any bit of history you're reading, if it actually tells you something about yourself when it's about you, there's something special there, I think, and something worthwhile. So I sort of was taking that idea of, the way in which the camp, if you like, or the ground as we call it, describes the culture in so many ways and describes the priorities of that culture so well. And just by the way we group our caravans, the way we relate to each other through the space as well, was something I wanted to capture and to do something with, because I thought in a way that's the best way for me at this stage and where I was thinking and feeling about things, to show my feelings about it. So I decided to rip off and borrow liberally from all of the visual styles that the powerful use, right? Architectural drawing, master plans, ground plans, maps, okay? All of which, when done with nice ruled lines and nice and cleanly, are, the enforcement of power in many ways. If you think of it from that kind of, angle, these straight lines that, tell us what's going to happen in a place or what should be happening in a place, if you like. So I decided to take that and then hijack it, basically. Taking the bird's eye view to start with, taking the idea of the map, of the architectural drawing, and just doing it my own way. And also letting the logic of it, if you like, the logic of how travellers run their space and organise it, let that dictate the drawing rather than, the formalities or standard techniques of architectural or cartographic drawing, okay? So, that was basically my idea. And I just, over 2 nights, very crowded nights, slightly sleep deprived, I just went and did a drawing of where I lived, of our yard. And tried to sort of build in that idea of, okay, so the caravans and the vehicles shape the space, not architecture. It's not an architectural drawing, this, it's actually people living in space and placing themselves within it. I tried to show, you know, I did lots of diagrams on side panels, which I've not unfortunately shown here, where I showed just how ridiculously related to each other we all are and how we're all cousins, and you know, it gets a bit frightening actually. You get down the family tree. I showed how, you know, nomadic lifestyles dictate who goes near the gate and who's, you know, up in the corner. So, you know, just through that, just through trying things out, and also adopting this deliberate shaky line, this non-architectural line, which is hand-drawn and very kind of vulnerable. I wanted to also show how places are, how, you know, a place like this, which you may not like the fact that these places exist, you may not like the people, you may have issues with travellers, right? And a lot of people do, right? But you can't say that it's not a culture. You can't say that it's not a way of living that has its own order, its own logic to it, its own way of where. And that was really the point I was trying to make, kind of by ripping the piss, if you'll excuse my language, a bit out of all of these formal drawing styles and illustrative styles, which I'd noticed, you know, having gone to uni myself and, you know, been ruined by book learning, as my uncles would say. You know, I was aware of how communities were diagrammed, if you like, how communities were visually represented and put into these neat flow charts and boxes. And I just kind of was, at this stage anyway, done with that. I just was like, no, I'm going to do something that, you know, he takes that visual language, but then just does its thing with it. From that, I suppose, came this idea of dialect as an idea behind my work. So dialect in the sense of the language being used. All the labelling here is what travellers call things, by the way. You know, so everything's a trailer or a wagon, never a caravan. But also in terms of verbatim testimony, all of that. So language was a big influence in how I was doing this. But it was also this idea that the kind of drawing I was doing was not proper, formal, diagrammatic drawing. It was like a dialect of that. Bit of a tortured metaphor, I know, right? I admit that. But from that, and from quite a few beers as well, I must admit, came up the idea, the really bad pun that was the dialectogram. And that word just stuck. And no matter how much I said, that's a joke, by the way, and it's not a real word, people kept on using it and demanding dialectograms of me, which sounds terrible, doesn't it? But no, that it just stuck, and it was with me forever, ever since that day. So this was the sort of origin point of dialectograms. And if I've got time, Andrea, I want to very briefly show another two, which give a sense of how things developed and evolved, and then I'm happy to take questions. And
yeah, you totally do. I was just going to say it's like 5 to 5, so.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'll try and go for another 10 minutes maybe, and then I'll shut up and let people talk if they want. Does that seem fair?
That seems good, yeah.
Grand. Okay, I want to stop the share here, and I'm going to go to the next of these. So, to go back to Red Road, right? There I was at Red Road, coming out of that experience. I'm quite happy in some ways. Really done some good work, I thought, and work that was new to me. I mean, I recognized what I developed, and it was a whole new way of working, a whole new style of project for me. It was quite exciting. But I was also very aware that, okay, what do the people involved get out of this? What is the relationship there? You know, if I'm just extracting all their stuff, all their knowledge, you know, sucking out of them, and then going off and making artworks and doing exhibitions, you know, getting free beer and cheese and wine and all of that sort of stuff. What does that mean? Is that okay? And I kind of decided that it wasn't, and that actually what I wanted to do was find ways of bringing the people into the process more. Of actually going back to that first one, where that was my work, it was my life, it was my background and biography, and it was done according to how I felt about it and in my sensibility, I suppose. You know, back to that spirit of trying to be grounded as much as possible. And I was very aware that for all we had a good time doing Red Road, maybe that wasn't so well developed, and the documentary format of doing that wasn't the best way of doing it, of achieving that. So I started to look at different ideas, and at this point I was doing a PhD, so I was getting more theoretical about it, I'll admit, and really trying to place that within both my own discipline of illustration and, you know, visual communication, but also in the other disciplines that I, well, borrow from, to be polite about it, you know, geography, urbanism, architecture, you know, anthropology. All of these were influencing me and of great interest. And I came across several ideas, and I don't want to go too much into the theory just now. I'm happy to elaborate on it, but there's a guy, you probably know about Bruno Latour, writer on design, art, and lots of other things. And he developed this idea of the thing, right? So within art and design, obviously things are important to us. We make things a lot. We make objects. That's really what we're about. But he was conceiving the thing as not so much just an object or an inert mass, as it were, but a series of processes, a series of arguments, actually, and discussions, a social material assembly, if you like, that came from people coming around a design process, say, or an object, and then discussing what that should be, if you know what I mean. So if you think about, say, for example, he used the example of a car, and cars are obviously lots of gadgets and gizmos that come together into an object, a product, but every one of those has been debated and discussed and argued over. The process of assembly requires communication in so many ways. And from the original idea of the thing, which was a Viking parliament, a Scandinavian parliament, he took that metaphor and put it into the object and said, well, all objects in some ways are things. They involve argument, discussion, debate, and not always agreement as well, before and after they're made, in that sense. And that basic idea really resonated with me, because what I often found myself doing within a dialectogram project at that point was I'd have this big drawing on a board there, and you can see one there, big stiff words that I have to carry around and look ridiculous doing so. So often I had this object that I was working with for weeks and months and very concerned with and talking about all the time. And it just seemed to me, well, that describes what I'm doing. It is a thing. And that thing that I'm creating doesn't just sit there in my studio. It actually bleeds out into the world, and I get people to talk about that, to contribute to it, to argue about it, to discuss what we should depict as well. And that basic idea of thing theory became very important to me, and I kind of harnessed it for the dialectogram process. And I'll show you two where this sort of came into the fore, one successfully and one not, I would say, if I can find it. So what I want to do from this point on then, from about 2012 onwards, given that the world hadn't ended as it was supposed to, which was hugely disappointing because I had lots of things to do at the time, was, I wanted to move away into a place where the drawing could become transparent, right? The drawing itself, or the process of making, was as back and forth, or close to that back and forth that I was having during the fieldwork. Fieldwork, was great. You've got to talk to people, you got to know them, had cups of tea, went to the pub, did things together. And I was already starting to build in things like workshops and activities and walks to my practice, so that, we were having as much of a two-way as possible. But that wasn't happening so much with the drawing. It was hard to do because drawing is by nature quite a private thing. You can do collaborative drawing, and I have done elements of that as exercises, but in terms of bringing the kind of final work together, it was difficult to make it transparent. So I started to take a phased approach. To cut a short story long, I started to kind of phase the development of the drawing over time, and invite people into the process as much as possible, so that they could see how the drawing was developing, understand it, we could discuss it, we could have further debate over how the drawing developed. And I pioneered this idea, or not pioneered, I kind of trialed this idea over two drawings around about 2013 to 14. And this first one here, is the Free Hetherington. Now, the Hetherington Social Club was a postgraduate club in the University of Glasgow, ran for many years until it was closed due apparently to financial mismanagement, but was also being taken over by the corporate estates to be turned into an office block, basically, and sold off. There was something questionable about that process, to say the least. And this was in 2010-11, where David Cameron, remember him, came into power, and austerity and cuts were becoming a big agenda item, as it were, and were affecting how universities were doing things like widening access. Anyway, the students, bless them, at Glasgow, mobilised. a large group of student activists were mobilising against the cuts, and they also were seeing the situation at the Hetherington, and they occupied it. And they occupied it for a year, the longest occupation in British history by students, it should be said, anywhere. And they occupied this old club. They turned it into a free university space. They were evicted several times, but always got back in. It was quite an exciting time, and they invited people from outside the student body in all the time, and you could go there, have a beer, listen to a talk to people. And during this, I was asked if I was interested in documenting the process. I said yes, but I want it to be iterative, and I want it to be a collaboration between us, and I want you to be kind of working with me to shape how we turn this into a piece of graphic art effectively. And we did that, we tried that, and it did work for a while, right? But several issues got in the way of completing this drawing, and I like to show this drawing because it is incomplete. It never got finished. Ultimately, we couldn't get enough cohesion in the group to even agree ways forward in terms of showing the drawing, and also the classic student kind of syndrome of course is over. I mean, a lot of them finished their courses during the time we were developing this, and off they went, of course, as you do, to do other things and get on with their lives. Often other activist, involvements and engagements as well. So the drawing kind of never got completed, but it was one that I started to develop a phased, transparent approach where I was inviting people in. But I do think it's a nice one to look at just because it shows you how I work. I start with the ground plan. I start to put layer material in bit by bit, as it were. I pencil out areas, as you can see here in the top. I'll pencil out ideas, but I will leave spaces as I go, so that when I bring people in, when I bring the drawing to the people I'm working with and discuss it with them, usually about 50% done or 75% done usually, we can talk about those empty spaces, we can talk about what we put in there, we can also talk about what we've done so far. Another reason I do it this way now as well is ethics. One thing I noticed from the Red Road stuff is that, it's one thing to show a film to someone and ask for their approval or ask if they've got any issues with how they've been represented. But a weird spidery map-like drawing with lots of stuff in it that you can't take in one go is very hard to approve with your participants. It's very hard to walk them through everything that you've put in there at that stage. So by phasing it, again, I could bring people in at earlier stages and ask them what they felt about aspects of the drawing. And actually this backfired a bit in this drawing, because when depicting the sleeping arrangements, there was massive disagreement between two different groups of the activists over the explanation for how people slept in the Free Hetherington. And it boiled down to this: those who slept in the corner here were accused by the other group of being lazier and less committed because they wanted to have a nice sleep in the mornings, whereas those who slept by the door over here were more committed because they were up and out and ready to protest, right? Now, that was an example of dissensus, I suppose, coming into it, which, given more time, I think we could have resolved and found a way of dealing with it. But at the time, it just actually really pissed a lot of people off, not with me, but with each other. And so it just was something I could not complete as part of the drawing, because we really needed to come to some agreement on how we would depict it. But what I was not trying to do was reach consensus per se of the information, but consensus on how we show the information. And as much as possible, I do show contradictory ideas and information within a drawing if it exists. I don't believe in erasing that. I'm trying to get all sides and all perspectives as much as possible, but not in a sort of BBC Balance sort of way, in a hopefully a more intelligent way. So that was the Free Hetherington. So as you can see, the drawing sort of develops over time, kind of inky tendrils kind of start to grow out like fungus, and by the end, hopefully, we have a completed drawing of some sort. But what I was doing with these processes was taking the drawing from the end of the process and putting it in the middle of the process, so that people could participate more easily in how that drawing was shaped and have something to say about how they were being shown and depicted. And the final one I'm going to show you here is Pearsall Community Flat. And this is where I think I managed to find a way of doing that, of bringing in this phased approach and letting the people I was working with drive me as much as possible and drive the artwork as much as possible. So briefly, Pearsall Community Flat was a NHS-funded health flat set in two. It was located in between two squares of tenements in Edinburgh, and what it did was provided holistic health support to the people there. The holistic social health model, as I'm sure some of you know, perhaps is it looks not just at the condition, but looks at what contributes to the condition. So, for example, if you're having trouble giving up smoking, it may be because you're addicted to the weed, but it might also be you've got a lot of stress in your life, and there may be these stressors and causes of stress which are, you know, leading into that. So what the flat was all about was trying to go deep into the community and really understand that, really understand what was causing stress. Sometimes it was literacy. The Pearsall area had a lot of recent migrants, and they couldn't write in English very well. So, you know, just the fact they couldn't fill in forms that they knew they needed to fill in stressed them, and then that caused further health problems and so forth. So it was this interesting space, very, very interesting space, not at all clinical, like a sort of homely flat, really, in all sorts of ways. You walked in there, you were offered a cup of tea straight away. It was very informal, and it was run by this genius of social engagement called Beth Ekman, who had shaped this place into a very fine machine in many ways for engaging with her community, bringing them in, and, you know, finding out ways of helping them, whether it was by the book or not, I suppose you could say. Its allotment in the top of the drawing here was hugely important for dealing with the male clientele, who often weren't that big on having cups of tea with the women, but didn't mind working on the allotment, and, you know, were able to get a great deal from that process there. But there was also, you know, there was children's workshops. Beth was very into Halloween, so we depicted her, quite frankly, terrifying Halloween costumes, and how she ran events throughout the year, and, you know, just the various ways in which she'd worked that space into a finely tuned machine. And going into this project, we did several things as well from the start. I'd adopted that idea of the thing, of the design model almost, from the beginning as well in this project. And we agreed that, okay, so I'm coming here to hang around, drink tea, and make a big weird drawing. What can I do for you? Because I'm funded to do this. I'm a pet illustrator, you know, use me, exploit me. And she did. So I did various things for them. I would design posters. I did lots of workshops for them, for the kids. For the women's group, I joined the women's group, which was fun, and learned a lot. And I used that as a way of getting to know the place, but I also helped with some educational aspects there. And one thing Beth wanted as well was a chance to look at the place she'd been working for 7 years and understand it better as well. So I was gathering archive material as well as the final drawing. And this was a chance for Beth to look at what she was doing and see if she was doing it in the best possible way. So from that, we got this really complex mad drawing, and it's one of the densest I've ever done, which really was about, you know, all of the people I was working with wanting to imprint themselves on the piece. As I say, we showed it at several different phases. I was directed often quite forcefully by them in many ways. Even the colour scheme was chosen by my participants. And at the end, Beth had a tool where she could look at what she was doing. And interestingly, she concluded, to my horror, actually, it was time for her to leave the place, because she realised that she was so imprinted on it, she was so represented in that space itself, that it was maybe time for someone else to come in and maybe look at the space and you know, take her dominance away from it a bit, especially as she felt it was also very gendered. It was very female space and needed to be more open to the men of the community. So from that, we actually got some quite hard outputs for Beth and for the people running it. And we also got this artwork, which I think really does, to me, I look back on this one, it's definitely one of my favourites and represents what happened there and how those conversations went, and the social architecture, I suppose, that we uncovered through that process. And that really is kind of it. That's the 4 I wanted to show you. There are others there, and if you go to the website, not a commercial, but, you know, if you go to the website, you'll see scanned versions of other ones there as well that you can look at that are quite different to these ones as well. But I think hopefully you've seen how I went from kind of a satirical perspective to a documentary to one that was much more participatory, much more involved and complex at the end, and continues to be as I carry on. And I think at that note, I'll shut up for a wee while and let people ask questions if they want to.
God, whew, that was amazing. That was so cool. I'm always blown away by your work, but it's really, I feel like we've known each other now for 5 years and I've never actually heard you speak so much about it. So it's awesome. So I guess we'll open it up to questions. I feel like I kind of like, I wish we were in person so we could just like dive in and like deal with like, look at all the little details and stuff. Cause I feel like that's the amazingness of these, but I do want to say that they are all on the website. So if you look up Mitch Miller Dialectograms, you can find it. And you can sort of zoom in. And also there's a few on the city website that he contributed to the new issue. So you can sort of zoom in and like see the little conversations between people and just how people are represented and yeah. So so we can either do questions, you can either like put up, do we have hands? God, I like moving between 3 different platforms in life. It's really hard. So we can either put them in chat if we have any questions in chat. Yeah, there's some really good comments in chat already. Let's see. So we have one from, yeah, so I don't know. I'm not going to read this whole one from Yufei Lee. Pardon me if I'm massacring that name. So there's some really interesting stuff. Hopefully we'll get more stuff to look at. It'd be really awesome to have, yeah, I'm not familiar with that. The modernology, is that how you would say it in English? In the 19th, that sounds amazing. So I'm gonna look that up right now. But so the question is, what was the most common difficulty you faced during surveying a place? What was your thinking process to reorganize your materials in a way to represent a place? And it's after the field work. So we'll start with that one.
That's a great question, and Wajiro Con is definitely a gap in my knowledge, so I will be sorting that out. And so thank you first of all for drawing my attention to that. That's a great find. The most common difficulty, I think, is always access. To be honest with you, it's always about gaining access. Even if you've been invited, it's about negotiating the possibility of discussion and conversation with people and dealing with that and building the trust. That's always difficult. It's always a challenge, I suppose. It's also the bit I quite like, in a way I quite enjoy, but it is always very difficult. But it can also be really, really difficult. There's 2 things that tend to be difficult. One is understanding the actual physical place. It can be really hard just from eyeballing it. You know, and you generally don't have plans in a lot of places I work, so there's no guide to that. So a lot of the work is taken just trying to piece it together as best I can. With the Barrowland Ballroom, for example, which I've just done, very famous building, everyone kind of knows it in Glasgow in some way. People were asking, so was the hardest part, was the sign, doing the big neon sign the hardest part? I said, no, it was the cupboards, because just knowing where the cupboards are and what's in them and where, you know, and it's like, why do you care? It's like, someone has to care. But, you know, it was important. It was important in terms of the structure of the place and understanding how it was put together. And then narrative as well, and bringing narrative into place is quite difficult because narrative isn't spatial. Narrative is linear in most people's minds, and they work in a very different way. So bringing them into that way of thinking is hard too, as well. And in general, I suppose, I mean, I always run out of time. And just to be clear, just to be honest about it, no matter how I manage my time, I'm always out of it by the end. And, you know, just managing those different elements now, or the less hair I have in my head, because it's just getting that project working in the way it should and giving the space and time for people to talk and respond to the work before it's all over is always a big challenge. But that's a really good question, and thanks for asking it. Was there a second part to that question? Sorry.
Oh, I'm on to the next question already. Reorganizing, representing a place. I don't quite understand that. If you want to say that again.
What was your thinking process to reorganize your materials in a way to represent a place
after the fieldwork?
In its entirety after the fieldwork, maybe?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that means.
I think, God, calling it a thinking process might dignify it too much, but I do think one thing I do is, what's handy for me is I have this basic unit, which is an A0 board of mount board, and that's what I'm drawing on. And I'm quite material led in my thinking. So I've got to fill this somehow. This is what I'm working with. And so I use that as a kind of discipline in terms of how do I organize the place within that? How do I honor what I've seen and done, or I'm seeing and doing within that space? And I kind of just work through sketching and working that through. And, you know, if you look, if anyone ever x-rayed one of these things, why they want to do it, I don't know. But if they ever did, they see lots of lines and score marks and dents and things from me just having to work it out within that space. And I use that discipline of the big board, if you like, there to help me do that. And I think that is what gets me through that process of like reorganizing materials. And then from that, it's then, what do I have room for? What makes it in? And really, these things are finished when I run out of space usually. So it's whatever gets in time. But it's a constant iteration between available space, what people are saying to me, what needs to be there, or I feel needs to be there as well, and also the shape of it. I don't know if I can explain it any better than that, but it's very sort of, I work through the fingers a lot. I think through the fingers more on that one, I think.
That's awesome. I'm just going to use chair's privilege and just throw in that I've spent a lot of time developing community space, and architects like never think of cupboards. Like they never ever put cupboards in anywhere. And like every group that uses a space will have storage needs, like every single one. And they never get, like, that's always the huge struggle in my experience, like just trying to figure out where you put the balls and the yoga mats and the bikes and the arts, you know what I mean? It's just like never enough storage anyway. So it's awesome that you look at cupboards. So the other question is another question from Sharon about, has the bird's eye perspective ever been a subject of debate amongst participants? That's super interesting. Like, have you had that conversation with people?
Yeah, I want to read your work, by the way, Sharon, because yeah. Well, first I want to read your work, Sharon, because I'm always up for a bit of criticism of the bird's eye view. It sounds like we'd get on. But yeah, no, oddly enough, it hasn't. And that makes me think that maybe it should be, or maybe I should be trying to encourage that a bit more, because they just seem to kind of accept it's a map, it's a thing. And I can't think that I have come across anyone kind of taking me to task for using the bird's eye view. It's just, they just accept it. And I think that says something about the use of the bird's eye view in visual literature and visual communication perhaps as well, and how commonplace it is to people. So we should be arguing about it. That's a really good point. Hope that answers the question. Yeah. When I have my first argument about it with participants, I'll let you know though, Sharon, because it should hopefully be a doozy.
So there's one from Oren about if you've tried to work in 3D or video.
Would love to. I am actually starting to look at whether model making would ever work. I have no experience in model making. And as a kid was very impatient with model making. I have lots of Airfix toys and Warhammers, just look terrible. So I would have to, I'd have to upskill quite a bit. But no, I am interested in it. There's a project I'm working on just now at a place called Hamilton Hill in Glasgow, a place called the Clay Pits, which place it was a kind of unofficial community as a wasteland, which is people just used. Lots of nature there, deer, kites, now it's been taken over by the middle classes through Scottish canals, I would say, and it's now been turned into a proper nature reserve, right? So I'm working there to kind of recover that working class history, if you like, or that aspect of its history. Anyway, point being, the Clay Pits, as its name suggests, was a clay quarry, and it was the clay quarry that lined the Fourth Clyde Canal in Scotland, which was, by the way, a lot of the industrial world came from that canal initially because of what they were moving along it. So there is clay there, and we're looking at maybe working with clay, even just to make 3D objects that can be part of, maybe not the dialectogram, but maybe part of the talking about it and the discussion of the dialectogram as well as we go. As I said, workshops are a big part of what I do, and I do everything from like come and get a free portrait and talk to me in a shopping centre to working directly with small groups and thinking about mapping. And I want to get into more of 3D mapping, as you say, but through the clay, through models maybe initially. In terms of digitally and 3D, it's not a skill set I have, but always interested in the idea, potentially down the line. But for now, I'm playing with some clay in the next project. I'm quite looking forward to that. So yeah, it's definitely a dimension I'd love to look at more.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you've talked a lot about, these are all contested spaces that you've been working in. It seems like and a lot going on. Like, have you used them, or have they been used for sort of campaigning, or as part of this contestation?
Yes, and kind of different ways, soft and direct, I suppose. I mean, I think the first one, Travelology, was a kind of campaigning, but it was quite soft campaigning, or rather diffuse campaigning. It was just me saying something as an individual. The second version of it, the secondary version of it, I think we used that, and I work with advocate groups for travellers in Scotland, and I run one in Glasgow in particular myself. So we have used that through working with museums and cultural outlets to, I suppose, promote and argue for the value of the culture. And that one, the drawing I'm talking about, is in Glasgow museums now, which I think as an aspect of our broader campaign is really useful, because it's now an object that people are looking at in a museum and discussing and talking about. So yes, I have used them that way. The Free Hetherington, I suppose, was meant to be an aspect of that. Didn't quite work out that way. Clydebank Library was not a campaign as such, but it was about making a point about the value of the library and making a case. So the surrounding that project, my part of it, was this ongoing argument for the retention of the library and its continuation, and the fact that we still need libraries, even if it's only to do DWP reports every week, which a lot of them are used for now. So yeah, there have been certain ways it's been used that way. I think the last few years not so much, and I've gone kind of a heritage route to some extent, just due to the work that's available, which annoys me in a wee bit, not because of the heritage, but I kind of miss causing more trouble through what I'm doing. So I am hoping to move into more of a sort of, I would like to be used for more campaigning, is what I'm basically saying in a very roundabout way. I'd love to be doing more of that work again, because I feel like I've kind of come away from that a bit. There are, in Belfast, there's a group of dialectographers now as well, which blows my mind, by the way. I make up this bullshit word and then people are doing it elsewhere. It's not right. But a really nice bunch of anarchist punks. I'm not kidding, proper punks, like hooks and everything. And they very politely asked if they could use my technique to draw a dialectogram of their own space, of their old venue called the War Zone. Anyway, again, not to go on too long, but this is part of their ongoing campaign for music spaces, for the value of that anarchist tradition in Belfast and punk tradition. And yeah, they're definitely using it, and they found new ways to do the dialectogram, I should say, that I hadn't thought of, which was amazing. It was like, wow, you've seen all the stuff I missed. That's great. So that was really inspiring, and has led me to really want to get back into, I think, more engaged stuff in another way, and maybe a more political or social issues based way, because I feel I've kind of gone away from that a bit. But it was a good question. Thank you.
All right, we've got a few more. So Tom, actually, I should invite you just to ask your question. Is that Tom? I should be doing that. Maybe that's better.
Yeah, sure, I can do that.
Yeah, awesome.
So I just wanted to say I found this really fascinating. So thank you for taking the time to chat to us about this tonight. I'll definitely sort of go in and have a look at some more of your work. You touched on this earlier when you were chatting about the activists, but I just wondered how you strike a balance between sort of being true to the physical environment that you're sort of studying in, and how you balance that with being true to the way that people who live there sort of see and understand it. And I wondered if ever they contradict, and if so, like how you manage that divide. So.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So yeah, in terms of the environment, I try to be as true to it as possible, but I never let that get in the way of narrative or the perceptions of the people there, I suppose I could say. And it's like a balance. On one hand, people find it quite powerful to see their space represented, that their place shown to them, more or less as it is. So well enough that it bears some relation to the actual place. But I'm not an architect, you know, so I don't care about getting it exactly right. I just want to get it kind of right, if you know what I mean. I want to get it right enough. So where I need to cheat, and I cheat a lot, I will. I'll leave things out, or I'll just, you know, kind of put a comic strip over or something where I feel like I'm not sure, or there's a bit of debate about it. But no, in terms of their perception, I try to let that lead me, and you'll see in the drawings, hopefully, that, you know, the places that are the most text heavy or the most represented or the most carefully represented are always the ones that people talk about the most. And I try and, like, it's almost like a, you know, those weird homunculus things you got in anatomy books, you know, where they had the big tongue and the big hands and all of that. But like that, those get the attention. The other places, less so. And I try and let that guide me as much and get the best balance I can. But it kind of differs drawing to drawing. When I was doing Kirkintilloch, like, the people there were so invested in this town hall. They loved this place. They knew the history. And, you know, one of the people I was working with, her great granny was one of the first, you know, donators, you know, to it and all of that. So they really cared. So I had to get it right. Like, they were like, no, we want this right. Whereas other groups are just, you know, Pierce Hill didn't really care too much about whether I got it all correct. It was more, they wanted the spirit of it. But I think what made it all easier for me overall was when I realised that I'm actually not there to really draw the physical space anyway. I'm there to draw the social space. I'm there to draw the social architecture of it, the people, and how that coalesces in the place. And what I'm doing really with the walls and the doors and all that, to go back to my comics background, it's the panels and gutter of the comic to me. That's the frame I'm using, and it works as a frame. And because it's a frame, I don't worry too much about breaking with it when I need to as well. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you.
All right, so we're like dead on time. So if like is there any other burning questions that anyone would like to ask? Now's your chance. I feel like an auctioneer, like going. This was amazing though. I'm just blown away by your work, and we've been talking like for so many years about how we could do something together, and like I'm so sad that hasn't happened yet, but maybe one day. Yeah, so if there's no other questions, I just want to thank all of you so much. Oh, I've just admitted somebody. Thank you all of you so much for coming at this tail end of, especially in the UK, of like lockdown and madness and too many Zoom meetings. And so I hope this was really inspiring to you as it was to me. I definitely feel energized and inspired, and thank you so much, Mitch, for doing that. Yeah, thank you, everyone. I think, yes, you can find Mitch on the internet. If you just, Google him. I'm sorry, we don't have, we don't have his, I should have your, maybe put your, maybe put your website in the chat.
And Mitch, you're open to collaboration with overseas, say, students that try to do similar projects in Jerusalem or in other places? Because it gives a lot of inspiration, but we have to try it. Maybe we'll get in touch with you, if it's okay.
I would love to, yes. Always very happy to work elsewhere or work with students who are interested in adapting these methods. And, you know, if I get a bit of foreign travel out of it, that's also good, because the furthest I've been is Edinburgh. So I need to go further than that, definitely.
Yeah.
No, I'd love to.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Oren, like his work with your, like you guys would be like a dream team.
Yeah, all the layers, you know, and looking below and, you know, refusing and resisting the bird's eye view, which is basically usually the security apparatus. And, you know, I'm probably being recorded now too, but, you know, this is where actually, you know, looking from below and getting the sense that you get from East Glasgow is really wonderful and gives me idea that I have to think about. But it's art and it's planning and it's resistance too to the mainstream view. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's why it's so exciting, right? I think you guys together would be whew, chills. I would get chills if you guys did something. Yeah, awesome. Right, so thank you so much, Sharon. So dialectograms.com, it's in the chat. And I think, and if you're gonna get it, do it fast because I'm gonna end this meeting so we can go. I'm gonna go have some drink. It's Thursday, like it's just time. But yeah, so thank you so much everyone for coming, and I'm so glad you did. And then if you missed any of this, it will be on the city website. So yeah, and feel free to share with friends and stuff because it was an amazing talk, and I wish more people had been able to come. All right, so I will say goodbye to everyone. Thank you so much, and it's lovely to see you. And hopefully we'll get to connect for reals at some point in real times. Thanks, Mitch. Thank you again. I wish we could
thank you,
do like
everybody.
an
Thank you.
applause.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to say goodbye, and I'm going to hit end, which will end it for everyone. So it feels so final, but I will say goodbye. All right.